Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my weekly Node-RED live stream here for perhaps under an hour this week of Node-RED core development. Welcome if you are a regular. Do say hi in the chat. I can see a few regular faces popping up. I'm just going to go tweak my lighting. One sec. Ooh. There we are. Turn off those lights. Turn on that light. A little warmer and less strobe effect going on the screen. So, hello. What are we up to this week? Well, for those following along the Node-RED project, we had the Node-RED 2.15 maintenance release last Thursday. We had the 2.2 beta release as well. So yeah, Thursday was a busy day for getting releases out the door. Now there's a few things to tidy up. Often just after we've done a release, and there's not a lot to do, but we've got a few things to tidy up. A couple of which we're going to look at tonight. In fact, going to look at what should be, famous last words, relatively straightforward little feature to add, which has been on the backlog for a while, and someone asked for a related feature. So I thought, well, that's a decent Monday live stream piece of work that we can get into the 2.2 beta refresh that should happen on Thursday this week, but we will see. So yeah, why don't we just crack straight on? I'll say hello to Softy2K, Zoramil, Old Bobby Tables, Nathaniel, Mauricio, Halley77, Grants Pie. See, this is the problem with all, familiar names who I know. I'm always intrigued how you guys pronounce your own handles in your own name. Oh, and I should say, Grawsome, first time Twitch viewer. Very pleased for you to join us. But yeah, I'm always intrigued because it's funny when you read it. So I can talk. My handle everywhere is Nollery, which isn't how it's. I don't think I pronounce it how it's written, but yeah. But there we go. So as ever, I apologise if I butcher your names. Anyway. So yeah, and Steve, good to see you. Noxy Boy, Rebelor49, all welcome. It seems like the gang's all here. And that's one of the cool things about doing this live stream. It's actually, it doesn't get a massive audience on the live stream, but there's a committed group of you who, for whatever reason, tune in live to watch me prattle on about this stuff. So that's always pleasing to see. So what are we going to do tonight? Well, let me pull up the right tab. Now I've lost that one. Here we are. So this is the Trello board that we use to just capture enhancements. These tend to be long tail things, not the sort of immediate things that just get done. And there's lots of cool ideas. Some are tiny bits of work, some are big bits of work. Some, frankly, may never see the light of day, but we've captured them on here. That for those who haven't seen it before, you sort of ignore the ideas column for historical reasons. I mean, what? There's stuff on there, but there we are. They tend to be sort of bigger concepts rather than more discrete items. And then these different columns identify broad brush stroke areas of, is it in the runtime, in the editor, specific to nodes, subflows, context, projects. And then the last set of columns are where I throw stuff when we think we're going to do them, and I have to say this next column hasn't really come to pass. So there we are. So Zoromil, and I should say hi to Ben the Ball Geek. Good to see you. So Zoromil, is there any plan to add a configuration node on the subflow configuration? Not entirely sure what you mean by that. If you wanted to elaborate what you mean. But as ever, when people ask, is there any plan? We don't have a plan for anything. We've got items on the backlog, and depending how the mood takes us, where the flow of conversation goes, things get picked up. But anyway, what are we doing tonight? It's these two we're going to look at tonight. So it's been a question that comes up from time to time is having the editor, the fact you can zoom in whenever you reload, the zoom always resets. So what we're going to do is, for one thing, we are going to remember the zoom level is item 1. The other item is, let's just see, if I hide the sidebar and reload, it always reloads with the sidebar visible. Something went a bit funky. Let's just try that again. Yeah, it always reloads with the sidebar visible. Similarly, now I think of it, if I hide the palette and reload, curiously, it remembers that I've hidden the palette. So yeah, there's some interesting inconsistencies. And in fact, you can see there's a bit of a rendering glitch going on up here. If I reload with the sidebar open, it's fine. If I hide the sidebar and reload, it isn't fine. So basically, this is what we're doing. We're going to tidy up some of this remembering. Tidy up some of this remembering. Noxy Boy says, the Monaco editor never remembers when I resize, which I believe is supposed to work. Do you mean resize when you resize the edit dialog, like that? Oh, that's curious, because it should. I mean, certainly, maybe not between reloads of the page, but if I make the change node super big, that works. But the function node doesn't. That's curious. I'd not noticed that. That's a bug. Okay. Right. So my plan was a nice small feature with there's a bit of feature creep, but let's rattle through. So just to pick up the thread from Zoromil about config nodes, like having a MQ broker config node picker where you define constants or other values to the subfield properties. I don't know. As a concept, it's not one that jumps out as being something we've considered or have any particular thoughts on. So would certainly be open to a discussion over that. But but perhaps not right here and now. I want to get focused on this stuff. So we're going to, for my own sake of, keeping this up to date. So I'm going to move these two cards over to in progress. And in fact, I actually think I added this store zoom level and local storage, forgetting we already had quite an old one. So Bobby Table says, so each node, each type of edit dialog should remember what size it was. And that's largely down to the fact that, we did it that way because for some nodes you want more space, some nodes you don't. yeah, it's how it works under the covers. But let's crack on with doing some of this. Right. So first up, we are going to deal with zoom level. So Steve hopefully rated, while you're looking into storing zoom level and sidebar width, would you also consider remembering the selected tab in the sidebar as well? Yep, that is certainly related. We can have a look at that. What we need to first consider actually is, where are we storing it? Now, I had said in here, in local storage, and what that means, if you're not familiar, local storage is actually just in the browser. So that means in this Chrome, it would remember the zoom level. If I logged into Node-RED, in this Node-RED from a different browser, from a different computer, it wouldn't pick up that zoom level. Now, if I go and have a look in my .node-red .config, which one is it? .config.users. You can see in here we have editor view and then a bunch of settings. We've got sidebar where it remembers the order if you reorder them. Here's your key map. And let me make this legible so you don't all need to get reading glasses. Key map, context option, tours, git stuff, nrlint stuff. Anyway, this is right. And here, main menu item, sidebar, true, and main menu item. Let's see if I can get the syntax right through JQ, and then find the right path. I always get the syntax of this wrong, but ._.editor. Oh, interesting. It's not. So this main menu item palette and main menu item sidebar. Oh, sorry, menu item. These are somewhat historic ways we would remember if you toggled things in the main menu. And yeah, so I'm just trying to think whether we ought to, would it be better to retire those ones slightly, somewhat. See, this is what I mean by cans of worms, basically, is what we're looking at here. This is the settings file stored in the runtime. So whenever you change this stuff, the editor sends an HTTP request back to the runtime to toggle these settings in this file. So that means these things get remembered wherever you log in from, and it's not just in local storage. The only thing we store in local storage currently is remembering which tabs you have hidden. That's in local storage. That's the only thing we store in local storage, because we haven't really resolved how we want to persist that longer term. So first up, the question is, do we stick zoom level in local storage, or should it be in the runtime settings so it gets stored in this file? So Steve asks, if storing in the file, if a second user refreshes, will they get the first user's changes? It depends. If we have a look at the structure of this settings file, you can see the top level key is an underscore. So the top level of this file is the username of who's logged in. So here you can see admin, because I've done some testing with admin. here you can see I've done some testing in the past with a Nollery user, a user called Johnny, undefined, Alice Skywalker, who for some time has been the default user on the Flowforge platform without wanting to do anything. Some testing of a user with an @ symbol in their username. Anyway, it goes on. But the point being that if you haven't got admin auth enabled, or you have but you allow anonymous access, then that is the underscore user. So yes, if you have unauthenticated access to the editor, then we have no way of distinguishing user settings. But if you have admin auth set up, then all these settings are stored against the user. Yep. And all of these all these properties do map into settings, view, show grid, snap grid, grid size, show grid, snap grid, grid size, and all the other bits. Yeah. Some legacy stuff there as well. So my only slight hesitation with remembering the zoom is the fact typically people are going to zoom in and zoom out a lot, and you don't really want to be sending off an HTTP request every time someone clicks zoom if they're going to click it in lots of times. So that's something to be mindful of. But yeah, well, let's just jump in. Enough sort of navel gazing about this. Let's just jump in. So all the zoom handling is in the behemoth of view.js, I think. And let's go look for the zoom actions. Yeah. So here are the actions for zooming: zoom in, zoom out, zoom reset. And they just call these local functions zoom in, zoom out, zoom reset. So here's where we do the actual work, and we store the zoom factor. And then old Bobby Tables has got ahead of me. If I just console.log the factor. Now, someone did suggest, maybe one of you guys, it would be nice to store the zoom per tab, but we're not going to go there. I think we're just going to keep the zoom universal, because I would imagine if people, the 90% case is going to be people are on a resolution where they want to zoom so the flow's legible, therefore they want all their flows to be zoomed to make them all legible. And actually, if they had to zoom each tab manually to get to their preferred zoom level, that would be a pain. But what you can see as I do zoom, you can see in the console.log down here, if I zoom that so you can see it, you can see the zoom factor is just it is a scaling factor. So normal zoom, the scale factor is 1. As we zoom in, good old JavaScript floating point where nothing is exactly the value you think it is, but good enough. So so we have the scale factor. What we're going to do is factor dot I've gone blank. What is the function? So pop quiz, JavaScript nerds. What's the function on a number to give you 2 fixed? There we are. I answered. Sorry, I should have given you guys a chance to answer. So 2 fixed. So now when we zoom, oh no, That's not done anything. What's that not done anything? Did it rebuild? Or was my computer just having a slow moment and I've managed to reload? There we are. So now you can see the zoom factor is a string with far less orders of magnitude. In fact, we can get away with 1 decimal place on that. Yeah. Okay, so we've got the zoom factor, which we do store. Okay. So now the question is, how do we want to store it? Do we stick it in local storage or do we send it back to runtime settings? I think I don't really want to get into a model of some stuff's in local storage and some stuff's in runtime settings. Let's just be consistent. And I think, yeah, given we store some stuff, we ought to be consistent. And I think it would be odd and could lead to a strange user experience where the editor remembers some stuff but not others. Or it seems to remember stuff, but as soon as they open it in another browser, it only remembers half your configuration. I think that would be frustrating. And there's no real need for it. So, what we're going to do is yeah, I can just my mind is racing around some refactoring, but no, we're going to stick with this. What we're going to do for the moment is just have a update zoom setting timeout. And then what we shall do is in fact, we're not going to put it in. Yeah. So I was about to add some code in Zoom View. Oh, see, Steve's made an interesting point. If you're using 2 different computers, you might have different resolutions and actually want different zooms on different computers. Okay. Touche. Good argument. You know what, given the long list of things I wanted to try and look at, yeah, let's stick with local storage for now. Easy enough. So, what we're going to do is we are going to call, if I just remind myself, so we do have this API that acts as a wrapper to local storage. We are going to call, and we don't need to worry about caching. So in here we would call red.settings.setLocal zoom level, and we'll do factor.toFixed. Well, in fact, we can just store the factor value. We don't need to worry about getting too fancy with it. Okay, and then if I go find the init function, so this is what sets up the view, sets up all the event handling, sets up all the actions. Just pick a sensible place to drop in. Maybe once we've set up all the actions and all the annotations, we'll set up scale factor equals red settings dot get local, and I just want to check the API. Yeah, so we need to deal with here. So Sue's saying, is there any redraw on zoom? Would it make sense to have the zoom restored early as possible? Well, where we're putting it here is the end of the init function. So this this gets called when we're just constructing the workspace. So at this point in time, we don't have any flows to display. So this is before anything gets drawn. So this is a good place to restore it. But we do need to handle and then if what will we do? You know what? I'm just going to check the docs on local storage dot set item key value. Yeah, so this only deals in strings. So we are going to parse float from what it returns, and then as long as it's isn't not a number, and this always mucks my head. The JavaScript function is not a nan, not a number, but typically you want to know that it isn't not a number, so that it is a number, so that it's just too many double negatives in one short run of characters. So we've done that, but we do want to down here factor.toFixed may as well, because we need to store it as a string. So I suspect it would do the right thing if we passed a number in, but right. So now when I reload, okay, the zoom is what it is, and no errors because we don't have that value set. If I zoom in somewhat and reload, then it's remembered the zoom level. I set it back to 1, reload, and done. So yeah, for the zoom level, just put it in local storage. It really is that quick and simple, which is nice. Okay, now there are a couple of things I want to look at, which sort of cropped up as I was musing over what else to do. One of them is, so I've shrunk the palette there. If I just go back and have a look at the these two, so menu item palette. First, we'll look at what's the syntax. No. Do I do it like this? No. JQ is one of those tools, I don't use it often enough and it always trips me up. How do you format the filter? Yes, lots of text, lots of text, lots of text. I just need some examples. Give me some examples. Okay. So perhaps it wants to be a little more picky over which brackets you use where. No? Unexpected. Oh, yep, because you wouldn't put a bracket there. Cool. Right. So you can now see menu item palette is false. And if I expand this, rerun it, you can see it's now true. If we have a look at sidebar, you see it's true because the sidebar is showing. If I hide this sidebar, it's now false. So we are storing in user settings, is the palette and sidebar hidden? But if I reload, notice how the sidebar is being shown and note how the tabs are screwed up. The tabs being screwed up is a telltale sign of something has requested a tab to be shown whilst we're still constructing the UI, and try as I might, see a little nudge on the refresh and the sizes get fixed. But if we just go back and look at our settings file, you can still see, sidebar is now true because it's been opened up. So something is not honouring this sidebar option, and it's and I know I know what that is. It's kind of one feature is fighting another feature. Let's go have a look at the sidebar code. So in the sidebar, let's collapse down, make it a little bigger for you. So this is all the code for the sidebar container. You can see we've got an init function that gets called when we're initializing and does a bunch of work, including set up sidebar separator. Now, were I to rebuild this, which is a possibility I'm considering for 3.0, change some of the underlying structure, there is a ton of manual stuff going on, a lot of manual maths and resizing of elements on the page. I'm fairly sure we could, these days, do away with a whole bunch of some of these magic numbers in the code, like this -3. I think we could do away and let CSS do a lot more heavy lifting on resizing. I mean, just look at all these magic numbers, which they always trigger warning signals when you see magic numbers like 187. It just, nothing should be that hard coded. But anyway, I digress. We're in the init function. It's going through and setting everything up. And that's just setting up. See, I distracted myself and I lost my place. That's just setting up the sidebar, which lets you drag, or the separator that does the dragging. Here we have the actual setting up the sidebar itself. And curiously, there is this show sidebar called here, which some might say we shouldn't be doing. If I take that out, and I find my Chrome window, and if I refresh now, it still did it. Even when that commented out, that's curious. Essentially what's going on here is, in fact, show sidebar does nothing if you don't tell it what sidebar you want it to show. So that call to show sidebar is doing absolutely nothing. What I think is breaking things is this case here, where someone is calling show sidebar : first. What that's about is the fact you can reorder these sidebars. So let's put, say, the flow debugger first. When I refresh, it didn't used to do this, but at some point in the last few releases, we ensured whichever sidebar button you have first is the one that gets displayed. And we do that by calling showed sidebar with :first as kind of a, we don't know which the first one is, but here, well, in fact, here you can see we call red.settings.get editor sidebar order, which, if you've been following along, we look at .config.users. Here you can see sidebar order. See, that's the list of my sidebars that, because I've dragged them around, you can see Flow Debugger is first in the list. And because it's first in the list, this red.settings.get 0 will get Flow Debugger, which means if you call red.sidebar.show : first, it will show the Flow Debugger, or whichever one you happen to have in the list. And if you haven't reordered anything ever, here are the built-in tabs, the default order, and the info tab gets displayed first. Anyway, somewhere, someone is calling red.sidebar.show first. Here it is. So this is in red.js. This is the main entry point to the whole editor. And I'm just going to comment that out there. So now if I reload, notice how the info tab is the one being shown, because that was the first tab added. So it is the first tab, so it's the first one that's shown. And notice if I hide and then reload, it doesn't show the tab. And if I expand it now, that's slightly strange for it to expand quite narrow, but yeah, so it's this call which we added to ensure we showed the first tab in the list, means we're now overriding the setting of should we even show the sidebar at all. And there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem here. Yeah, a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. So what do we do? One option is we should only call red.sidebar.show if the setting isn't hide the sidebar. That's one approach. The other approach is, in fact, what I want to do is just understand the workflow of how's the sidebar even being hidden. How does it decide, where does it decide to hide the sidebar from the very beginning? So one possible place is this call to toggle the sidebar. Yep, toggle sidebar false. So this is getting called in order to hide the sidebar. And all hiding it involves is adding a CSS class accordingly. What I might just do out of interest, if we just return out of that, so it does nothing, which is a little cheeky, you can see, okay, so the default state, yeah, so nothing's working because I've commented out that code, but the default state seems to be for Red UI sidebar to be set to closed, which I don't know, actually. Is that true? Yeah, so when we construct the page, we default the Red UI sidebar to be closed. Now, where do we go from there? Basically what I'm trying to do is, there are two things to figure out. One is, where's the right place to, bit of logic to deal with. Ensure this first tab is the one that's shown. Although wasn't part of the feature creep one of you mentioned. Yes, Steve, you suggested remember which tab has been selected. Yeah. And this again, I'm getting into the murky territory of, well, what's local storage and what's runtime settings. Okay, I'm not going to worry so much about where it's stored. I just want to get the logic right so we restore it wherever we happen to have recovered the information from. So Cliff is saying, in the .show, can you just check if it's actually shown or not when the first is? Well, that's an, so the problem we've got is, again, show sidebar does a bit of double duty. And what do I mean by that? If I hide the sidebar and I call red.sidebar.show debug, it opens the sidebar because it was hidden and it shows me the debug tab. So red.sidebar.show will show the requested tab from whatever starting state it's in. So if I set it to first, it goes to the debugger. And that's quite important because there are actions to show the different sidebars, like, was it Control G D for debug, Control G C for config nodes, Control G X for context. So anyway, there are keyboard shortcuts. So that's quite useful if it's hidden, and I can just do Control G followed by D, and it opens the debug sidebar. So showed sidebar will show the requested tab and display the sidebar. But it all comes down to this, we've got this initial condition when we don't know what the list of sidebar tabs are because they're loaded dynamically, like the flow debugger, the linter, dashboard. Those will all get added dynamically. So there's a point in time when we need to be able to tell the sidebar, right, we've added all the tabs we plan to add. Please now, I want you to activate a tab, but I don't necessarily want you to actually display the sidebar. And yeah, so Bobby Tables, yeah, I'm trying to work out what that state is, and try and avoid adding extra flags. So if we look at so we've said show sidebar does the double duty. It will both open the sidebar if it needs opening and display the tab. Well, how does that do it? Well, sidebar tabs is the UI element of the tabs themselves, the actual tabs up here, and we call activate tab. And what does that? Well, it does a bunch of internal work, but here you can see where we set up the sidebar tabs using our tabs component. You can see you can see what is actually calling show. This is all just dealing with switching the tabs. It doesn't deal with displaying the sidebar. So okay, let's put this back in so we can see, is this getting called? I'll stick a warn on it so we get a proper stack trace. Yeah, so toggle sidebar true, and that's fine. But if we now hide it, toggle sidebar false. But now if I call show info, someone has called toggle sidebar true, which is fine. We are in this action. Oh, did I miss? Feels like it's right in front of me, but I can't see it. Show sidebar, set selected. Whose set selected are we in? Selected. And it's going to trigger an action. Who's triggering an action on me? Bear with me. Opt ID state. Opt ID. Yeah, there's some weird callbacks upon callbacks going on here. What is going on? Oh, right. It's to do with the menu, this view menu. We have these checkboxes. The way the menu works is this show sidebar is a menu item, and this is why in this file it's menu item sidebar, because what we actually store in the user settings is the state of this checkbox. So when I select this menu item, it toggles this checkbox. That in turn triggers an action, and the action is, in this instance, the toggle sidebar action, which in turn triggers the toggle sidebar function. And here you can see when I say show sidebar, then it this is triggering the red.menu.setSelected triggers the checkbox in the menu, which in turn triggers the action, which in turn triggers the toggle sidebar. It's all plumbed together. But those are the lines that I was staring at that I just didn't appreciate the significance of. This is saying someone wants us to show a particular sidebar tab. We identify what tab it is. We activate it in the UI, which means actually make it the active element. But then here we say, is the menu item sidebar option selected? If it's not, then we'll set it to selected, which in turn will trigger showing the sidebar. So if we want to show the sidebar if we want to show a tab without actually showing the sidebar, then we just, in theory, skip this bit of code. Okay. So what we can do here is let's say skip show sidebar, which is, yeah, awful name because this is show sidebar, but yeah, let's just work back from here. And if we go back to red.js, this this line I commented out. We want to make sure we show the first tab, but we'll set pass in true, so it'll activate the tab, but it won't display the sidebar. And then there's the later logic of loading up your settings, which will decide whether it displays or not. Right, that's a long way, very long-winded, and no idea if I've brought you along with me on figuring that out. But hopefully the changes I've now made means whenever I refresh, note how the debugger is, it's the first icon and it's the first tab. If I bring context up, note I haven't got it selected, but it is the first of the sidebar buttons. If I reload, we should now see, yep, context. If I now hide the sidebar and reload, the sidebar stays hidden. If I now expand the sidebar, it is context that is displayed. Now, note there's a bit of a rendering glitch. That rendering glitch is still going on, and it just needs me to do a little nudge. And again, that's where I'm sure some refactoring around the CSS and how we manage the resizing would help with that. But at least now we do remember the hidden state I've fixed. This is a bug fix. This was broken. We now remember the hidden state or not, and we restore back to the first tab, which is some amount of progress. Now, Steve suggested, well, let's can we remember which tab you had selected? Now that's something we could do here. So this is where we've loaded up the editor. We want to go and get the last active tab. So the problem with local storage, or at least how we're using local storage, is it isn't scoped to the user who's logged into the editor. So if you were to log out as one user and log back in as another, they would share everything we're putting into local storage. And that's not ideal. It's okay, I fully acknowledge it's a bit of a edge case. Well, local storage is per user, yes, but yeah, it's as in account on a machine, but if you log in as it means it remembers it for you, the physical you, if you like, versus what admin are you, what Node-RED user are you logged in as. That is the downside of using local. But is that an edge case? Is that a scenario we need to worry too much about at this stage? Did I remove toggle site? No, I haven't. There's some console.logging. Thank you, HiveMind, for reminding me to go and remove that. All right, but last selected tab, red.settings.get local sidebar, last sidebar tab. And then if that's not set, we will default to first. Okay, so that will restore this non-existent setting. Then what we want to do in sidebar tabs on change. Just want to console.log tab, because I can't, I think, well, it's almost certainly going to be tab.id, but yeah, so you can see if I change these tabs, you can see it's the tab object, and yeah, it's .id is what we want to store. So red.settings.set local last sidebar tab tab.id. So that will now store into local storage every time you change the tab. If we come down here, so this is where we call showed sidebar. Another edge case is, let's say you have the flow debugger shown, you then uninstall the flow debugger and reload, then the tab it wants to show isn't known. So here we've got some logic around known tabs and how does this logic work? One sec, let me just known tabs. Yeah, we're all good. So what are we going to do? If we don't know of the ID, then what we're going to do is actually come back in with, well, avoid an infinite loop to begin with. Yeah, so what this will do is, if the ID we've been asked to show isn't one we know about, so we can't do anything with, we will come back in and switch to the first tab. Is that reasonable? Is that reasonable? Trouble is, this is such a obscure edge case. Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay, so with that, if we reload, oh, errors. Yep, infinite recursion. How did I manage that? Oh, yeah. So I managed that because the first thing we do, if you pass in colon first, is we replace ID with the name of the tab. So yeah, it will always not be first. So let's just forget that, trying to be too smart. Okay, so info tab shown. Is that what we want? I don't think it is. Or is it? See, I think now we've got some interesting local state. So get local, what do we call it? What did we call the setting? Last sidebar tab. Yeah, so that's set to info. So, okay, it did the right thing. I had to query it because info is what it would show if it wasn't working. Okay, so we're showing help at the moment. If we reload, oh, it's gone back to info. Okay, what does last sidebar tab? That's called info. All right, have I done this in the wrong place? Console.log sidebar on change tab.id. Sidebar on change info. Okay, so something is explicitly switching it to the info tab. Last selected tab. Red dots. Have I not made any typos on this one? Yes, that should be context. So we're going to come back in here and say, add back in our console.log that we removed. So we can see what ID, which tab we're being asked to show. Okay, so sidebar on change info, show sidebar info. If we go to context, now refresh, what do we see? Sidebar on change info. Something is triggering our on change event and taking us back to info, which is jolly rude of it. What is causing that, do we think? Now info is the first one that gets shown. I think that's the problem. So the tab bar starts empty. Things start registering tabs, and when we add the first tab, because it's the first one, it gets activated. And because it's getting activated, the on change gets triggered. So we store the fact that the tab has changed, even though it is all just part of the initialization. So now we do get into a bit of life cycle of, well, this event is happening, but it's not an event we want to have to concern ourselves with. Is there a better hook? Is there a better hook for knowing that the user has changed tabs? Because this on change event, I mean, if it was purely everything driven through the show sidebar function, then we could just store in here whatever the user has asked to be shown. The problem is you can click on things, and it's clicking on things comes in a different path. They come in through the event handling, and then the on change. So what do we do? I mean, I can think of the hack we can do. the hack we can do is at this point in red.js, where we tell it to store it, we've done all the work to load all the nodes. We've loaded all the we've loaded all the nodes. We've loaded all the other components of the editor. Let me look for in fact, where do we initialize? Yeah, here, red.sidebar.init, info.init there. So in fact, we need to, what we want to do is we need to remember what the user last had selected, or we need to restore from local storage what they last had set before we start populating it with tabs, because each time we populate with a tab, we're going to reset that value. What the user last had selected when the editor, what the user had selected when the editor last closed. So at this point here, find the line again. What we're going to do is put that back to restoring the first tab. When we initialize the sidebar, we'll go and grab from local settings, local storage, the last sidebar tab before we start populating it, so it doesn't get corrupted prematurely. Then, if anyone happens to call with an ID of first, what we can do is we can do this. So what's this doing? If anyone calls red.sidebar.show :first, we will restore it back. We'll use that as a magic signal because this is an internal flag. It's not a public API as such. We'll take that to mean, okay, we'll take it back to whatever the tab was when they, the remembered tab. If that's not set, then we will go and grab whatever the first tab is from the sidebar order, which is probably unnecessary. But all of that's to say, let's set it to flow debugger, which is the second of the sidebars, and we refresh, and it has remembered debugger. And if we put that on one which isn't even in that list, so dashboard, if I reload, then it's brought up dashboard, and that's job done. Cool. Yeah, okay, well that's now, I think that's working reasonably. I think that's yeah, I think that's all reasonable. All right, so where do we get to? We already were remembering the sidebar. We now have fixed properly showing and hiding the sidebar and remembering that and remembering which tab you were on. There is a discussion about whether remembering what tab you were on is desirable or not, but it probably is. Now, the actual Trello item, where we all started, was store sidebar width in local storage. And yeah, we haven't done that. So we are going to dip our toe in. It's 9:15. There's a possibility I have to go do a food shop before I go to bed. So all depends on stuff. So I don't want to be too much longer, just in case I have to, rather than have a cup of tea, go and do a food shop. But we're going to dip our toe. It's the sidebar separator. So it uses the jQuery draggable utility, which is fine. But like I said, it's got all these little magic numbers. And this is where remembering the sidebar width sounds easy. The hard part is restoring it and setting it back to where it should be. What keyboard shortcut have we got for show sidebar? Oh yeah, Command space. Control space, that works as well. Okay, that works because all we're doing is toggling a CSS class. That's different to programmatically setting the width to a specific value. But I think what we can do can just work out what is the relationship between what is new sidebar width and then where does new chart right, sidebar separation, chart right minus D. Oh god, what's D? Life would be easier. Yeah. Right, if we show the sidebar and drag around, so you can see we have a number, it changes. You can see if it gets down below, where is it, 150, that's where it stops dragging, but if I release it now, it hides the sidebar. So I'm not sure I'm going to get into hiding and restoring the sidebar width now, because it smells like a can of worms in terms of trying to get pixel perfect, because I know there are issues around here. Well, Cliffo, is it fixed in pixels and then percentage, so if resize window to keep the pixels. So it's pixels. So if I resize the window, the sidebar stays its size. But the problem is the way we size the main workspace and the way we position this separator, they are all independently positioned. But with all these magic numbers and all this maths going on, In fact, yeah, the editor stack as well, which is where do these edit dialogues appear from? In fact, you can see there's slight funkiness going on with that even. That's all absolutely positioned. So whenever I resize the sidebar, you also have to end up moving the workspace and the editor stack. It's not that you just make one thing bigger and CSS takes care of the width of everything else. That's why I kind of want to do a bit of a bigger dig into this code probably for 3.0. Certainly not going to muck around with it for 2.2, and find, can we get rid of all these magic constants and numbers, or just make it all work a bit nicer. Okay, let's just, case in point, look, if I drag that out, it's about 600 out there. If I just take it back, if I then run this line of code and set it to 600, notice how, yep, the sidebar's resized, but I've no longer got the handle, and the workspace is the workspace needs resizing as well. If I hide and just hide and reshow doesn't fix it. I think I've kind of buggered the workspace right now. Unless I take this back to 238, was it? And there you can see they appear. In fact, if I make it even smaller, there you can see again it the positioning all gets a little confused. Yeah, I'm not going to get into trying to restore the sidebar size. I think we've done a couple good fixes. We've remembered zoom. We have remembered properly the open or close state of the sidebar, and we restore the last tab. That feels like a decent, a few little bits and pieces to have tidied up this evening. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. This will go in as a pull request. Steve said, if you omit the resize event, does it sort it out? No, the resize event is for telling anyone who cares if a sidebar had some UI in it that needed to relay out itself programmatically rather than in pure CSS, then it can listen for the resize event. But the resizing the workspace and of the sidebar separator, that's what this 100 lines of code is doing whilst you're dragging things around. And so it needs what we really need is some of this abstracting out to be just a function, say, set the sidebar to this pixel width, and then it do the right thing for all the other elements. For a variety of reasons, that doesn't quite work with draggable, where getting the dragging stuff working was a bit of a headache, I seem to remember. But this code is 7-8 years old, so I'm no doubt could be better than it is now. But there we are. So I'm going to leave it there. We'll see. I expect the work we have done tonight to be in 2.2, and we'll hopefully have the beta refresh for that possibly later this week. Got a bit of a busy week in the day job this week, but if you're paying attention, we should have some fun stuff for you to see later this week. Don't get your hopes up. It's early days, but we're going to start unveiling more of what we're working on. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thanks everyone. As ever, wonderful to see you all in the chat. And if there's anything particular you would like to see, do shout, do let me know. Any particular questions, you know where to reach me. And with that, I will say good night. Cheers all.